I'm lucky to be blessed with like both sides of those genetics of like the explaining, teaching bit and the making bit.
Hmm.
Um, and then you just put a little business school sauce over it, and you have my package.
Hi, I'm Zack Newmark, and this is Damn Yankee. Don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platform for all of the latest interviews with performers and entertainers based here in the Netherlands and those traveling through the country. Wesley Verhoeve is an Amsterdam-based photographer and curator telling human stories through portrait-driven work that explores craft, community, and creative identity. His photography has been featured in the New York Times, National Geographic Traveler, Wired, and the Amsterdam newspaper Parool. Wesley runs the wildly popular Process newsletter on Substack, and his new exhibition opens on June 13th at Photo Festival Naarden. It runs through July 6th, closing on the date that he'll run one of his well-liked photo walks in Amsterdam. Wesley, thank you for joining us. What are people going to expect on these photo walks?
First of all, thanks for having me. The photo walks are kind of a result of my desire to bring people from my newsletter readership together in person. It's a newsletter really mostly for photographers, but also other kinds of visual creatives or creatives in general. And as it goes, most people in the photography world, and I feel confident saying this, are towards the introspective, shy, maybe, that kind of side of things. And so oftentimes it's also quite a solitary hobby or job because it's just like a thing that you do by yourself. And the more we put people together, the more we learn together, the more we enjoy the craft together. And it's just like the social element of the craft like gets really enhanced. And so instead of, Johnny or Kim walking by themselves through a city, we get together with 60, 70, 80 people and walk around for a couple hours. And it's not really about the photography on that day. But people, of course, all bring their camera, they're taking pictures, they get to nerd out. But it's about the social aspect. And then, it's very satisfying to see people form friendships. And then, later when I see on their Instagram story, like 2 weeks later, people are hanging out and they're making a zine together or whatever it might be. So it's really just, here's this group of people that do a thing creatively by themselves. Let's throw them all together.
And it's because your interest in the photo walking goes back a long time because you used to go on these sort of photo walks with your father as well. I heard you talk about before, but also more recently you were talking about these sort of, walking journeys that you take as almost being kind of meditative, at least for you personally.
Yeah, that is quite different from the group ones because then it's social. But when it's solo, that's when I get to lean into processing thoughts and feelings while taking photos. They don't have to be associated with the photos either, and it becomes more of like a meditative, at times even therapeutic kind of like ritual, like to go walk around for 10-15K and just be fully focused and in the moment with the thing, so that the busy brain of the creative doesn't go all over the place like it usually does.
Does that aspect of kind of, not trying to hold on to control and just letting things happen, is that also a part of the photo walks that you take people on as well?
No, not really. Because it's very difficult to do that when it's a group, because then you want to have that somewhat smaller extroverted side engaged. So you want to find community, you want to feel like you're part of something, you want to learn, you want to just have fun. And that's not the same thing. The solo walk is really more about the focus and like kind of like having the quietness and the calm.
With talking about the community, you do have quite a lot of subscribers on your Substack. Mm-hmm. So how many is that now? It's about 50,000, I think.
No. The Substack is, I think, 17,000. Yeah, around 17,000. The Instagram is like 60 something.
Yeah. And so all these people, what do you normally get in terms of attendance for these photo walks that you do?
It depends a little bit on the city, but I do them in Amsterdam, Paris, London, Berlin, Madrid. I've done one in Antwerp, and we're soon to do one in Vienna. I think our biggest one was last summer in Berlin. We had close to 100. and Antwerp is a smaller city, so that was just a smaller turnout. But Amsterdam is usually somewhere between, let's say, 60 and 80, depending on the weather. Also, of course, in the Netherlands, as I'm sure you've covered the weather.
As a journalist, yes.
Yeah, yeah. So it's a great amount to. It feels like a lot because people are like, well, how can you walk around with that many people? But it totally works that way.
And then with the personal walks that you go on, where did that sort of meditative feeling come out of?
Well, I started doing them really in earnest for the first time during COVID, when I was kind of stuck in Vancouver, British Columbia. And I lived in New York at the time, but I was in Vancouver for 3 months to work on a project. And after the first month, COVID happened, and so borders closed, and I could go back legally. I could go back to New York, but it was very, very bad at the time in New York.
Mm-hmm.
So it made more sense to just stick around Vancouver. And of course, in the beginning, they said, "Oh, it's going to be 10 to 12 weeks this pandemic," and that turned out to be a little bit different. And so I ended up being there for 5.5 months, and with no opportunity to work because everything, of course, was canceled.
Mm-hmm.
I ended up honing in on something to hold on to. So I'm kind of a routine based person, and I need like certain stable things in my life, because as a freelancer, it can kind of go all over the place. So I have a few things that I always try to do. And in that period, that became these long walks, because I was on the outskirts of Vancouver in a suburb. It was, of course, totally quiet, and I didn't have a car. There was no public transportation. So all I could really do was walk. And it was, the opposite of what I previously would always seek out, which would be super busy city centers of like Tokyo, Mexico City, just something with a lot of people, because people were very much my focus. And then I had to really teach myself how to see in a different way, and kind of all over again in that period. And so I did that by having this daily meditative walk for about 10, 15K just around this little suburb of Vancouver. And it was just kind of a revelation. What I thought was a boring, quiet place turned out to actually be this like universe full of tiny bits of magic and wonder and humor, and all just kind of hidden in the mundane of it all. And so that became this therapeutic meditative routine that I adopted there.
When you talk about this sort of humor and magic, is there something specific that kind of leaps to your mind that you remember?
Sure. Yeah. So I did that for 123 days in a row. And that body of work is about 35,000 photos, and it became a photo book. And so I can recall like specific photos from the book. The book is called Notice. It came out in 2021. And as far as humor goes, like there's this one photo that ended up on the cover because it was so emblematic of the theme of slowing down, paying close attention, and noticing something funny or beautiful, whatever it might be. And I was walking by a pool, and I saw that there was this inflatable flamingo behind a plant, and only its eye was really visible, and of course the pink arch of its whole head and neck. And it was just so funny to me. I mean, it's not like laugh out funny kind of funny, but it's the kind of like cheeky funny,
Mm-hmm.
Or there was this one stop sign on a street that was crooked. It was just like leaning forward by probably 15 degrees, like significant. And it just looked so hilarious to me. So like, that's kind of funny I'm talking about.
Like, yeah, this sort of just odd or absurd or weird.
Surreal, perhaps.
It was earlier this month, you were talking about on one of the radio stations here about Elliot Erwitt,
Mm-hmm.
who's been an influence for yours. He also did a lot towards these sort of cheekier photos, or a lot of humor embedded in his subjects, or the angles that he chose when he took his photos. Is he an inspiration for you as a photographer? And is that did you find a sort of connection to his work in doing these walks and finding this sort of...
The difference there, he's absolutely an influence and a hero of mine on a photographic level. The difference is just that his humor almost always involved people, and I had no people in my surroundings to photograph because of this COVID situation. So it's a little bit different, but of course, he's totally influenced me, and even just in a sense of like giving me permission to have a cheeky thing in there here and there, not
Yeah.
to have everything be so serious.
Yeah, I was because when we were researching you and your connection to, your words about him, because he passed away, I guess in November, I think.
2023. Yeah.
Excuse me. But in doing some of the research and his work, of course, I know some of his work, like with Nixon and Khrushchev.
Mhm.
In this sort of iconic stare down, which, is kind of like vastly different from where we are with, the US now in terms of politics. But, and of course, his Marilyn Monroe photographs are also, quite iconic.
Yeah.
But then, photos where he has like, someone sitting on a stoop with a pit bull or a British or a bulldog, I can't remember, in front of them in such a way that it almost looks like their head is the dog's head. And, and with the body, it was really, a lot more sort of a lighter side of his work when you think about, the iconicness of, other pieces of his.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. He was able to do both things, like very serious photojournalism, Che Guevara, like you said, Khrushchev, and then like a tiny dog in a sweater, like he's a special guy.
Do you, tell me about your own work in photojournalism and, how that's different from the sort of, randomness of your street walks and what comes out of those.
Yeah, the work that I just described lives more on the fine art side of my work, and so that's the kind of work that is exhibited and is in books, stuff like that. And then my photojournalism side is always about people, funny enough, and the other side is kind of never about people. And my focus is generally always about people doing interesting people doing interesting things in their environment. So like I do a lot of what's called environmental portraiture. So that could be a chef in their kitchen at work, or at the fish market getting fish for the restaurant, or it could be Marcus, who we have here, at his station doing his thing. It's always about an interesting person doing something interesting, and sometimes that's in the context of a magazine or a newspaper article about that person.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's for a brand because they want to showcase their employees or their customers or just people who use their product or service. But then still with that kind of editorial photojournalism kind of aesthetic, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Is there a form of photography that you enjoy doing more than one of the other ones?
I think I really just enjoy having the balance between those two. And there's, of course, many other types of photography, but this is kind of like what I do. These two things, like the fine art side, that's more quiet and meditative, and then the people-focused work. And I guess I would miss the people-focused work most if someone made me choose between the two, because I get a lot out of those interactions, and because I'm super curious about people and craft and community and things that, there's so much I don't know, and so many people know a lot of stuff about stuff that I have no idea about, and I love kind of like observing and learning from them. So I guess I'd have to pick that one if I had to, but luckily I don't have to.
It's interesting because you were talking, at the start about those photo walks as a way of getting, people who sort of tend to be more introverted, out there together and experiencing, this art form together. Would you describe yourself as introverted?
I actually would. People always think that's weird, but I think it's also because there's a slight confusion about what introverted means. People oftentimes think that means shy and not into socializing. But really what it just means is that it can be more draining for me than for people who are extroverted. Like they really thrive. Like, for example, yesterday we were at a little housewarming party. Well, it wasn't that little. It was a little house, but there were a lot of people. There were probably, it was like one of those tiny, Dutch word alert, arbeiderswoning, like those little old school built for labor people.
So like a working class home.
But like from the 50s, so it was much smaller. And there were probably 40 people there. And so I can do it, but then at some point I have to leave because it's just too much. Or I end up, which is what happened yesterday, in a corner having a conversation with one person that I'm like super engaged with, but I can't do the whole like group thing so well. That is very exhausting for me. I can turn it on for a little bit, but one-on-one is totally fine. But yeah, I am an introverted person, but I can turn on for if I need to.
So, because I've gotten to know you through, Simon Lucas, who, was a friend of the podcast and, did an interview with us and hosted your event on, the funniest English speaking people in Amsterdam. But, in which you were also performing in that with a stand-up or with a improv comedy group.
Right.
And, you don't normally associate people who do improv comedy on a stage, not just for an audience, but for an audience of other comedians, basically, or other performers. You don't normally think of that person as being somebody who would be introverted by nature.
You'd be surprised. Come hang out with us. It's a bunch of weirdos, myself included, who are a little bit awkward socially, perhaps. And, there's a lot of neurodiversity in our community.
Right.
Which is great because it helps us make unusual choices on stage. And that on stage are great and maybe less appropriate sometimes in the world, because then you say something that's a little bit weird maybe, but on stage that's really funny. So yeah, there's a lot of introverted people in that community.
Yeah. I want to show it for a second. This was what you had put together, the 101 funniest people.
I wouldn't say that. It's just 101 funny people.
101 funny people. Yeah. And
funny English language comedians that live in Amsterdam.
Yeah, and the project The Best Medicine, it was really an interesting idea. And where did, for you, that idea come out of?
Well, so I've been part of this community as a performer for a few years. So I moved to Amsterdam from New York in the summer of 2020. And of course, that was COVID time still. And so there's nothing I didn't know anyone here and I couldn't meet anyone here because it was all locked down. And there was an exception for education, however. And so I could take some classes at Boom Chicago, took some improv classes. Simon Lucas, a friend of the show, as you mentioned, it was one of my teachers, a phenomenal teacher. And that's how I got to kind of like integrate myself in that community. And I'd always had a deep passion and interest in and for comedy, but I'd never taken a time in New York to do anything about that. And now I did have lots of time because there's nothing else to do.
Yeah.
That's how I got to be in the community, learn about how special it is. And just at some point I was just like, how is this so under the radar here locally? Like, this is a group of people doing amazing stuff at a very high level, known in other countries. A lot of the people in this magazine tour Europe or even beyond. And that's one thing. So the level of the quality and the sheer volume of the people, like this is 101 people, but there's more even in this relatively small city that is not an English speaking city. Of course, everybody does sort of speak it, but it's not natively an English language. So like, how is that happening? Why is this community so big and so good and so kind of like known elsewhere, but here it's under the radar? Like if you ask any normal Dutch person on the street, it's like, is there somewhat of a comedy community in English here? They'd be like, I've never heard of it.
Yeah.
And so I like to shine a light on interesting people, including communities. And I was like, well, this is an interesting community that I have full access to because I'm part of it. Why don't we take the attention that I'm garnering with my photography work and kind of redirect that to this community and be like, look, everybody, look what's happening here. Look at these amazing people doing amazing things. And it's super diverse in age, background, gender, all that kind of stuff. And it's good. So I just was excited to shine a light on that community. So I thought, let's get a bunch of them in front of the camera and turn it into a thing, like a spotlight. And that's what happened.
Well, why make the decision to, do more with comedy or improv comedy? Before photography, you were working as in music, in the music industry. Obviously you've got some creativity that's always there and has to come out of you in some form. So why not make this, why not make the move to go back to music or, to go and try something else? What was it about improv, especially?
Um, well, music was I worked in music for 10 years, and after those 10 years, I was just kind of done with it in terms of like, I think in hindsight, we now maybe would call it a small burnout.
Mm.
And it was more about the politics and the social aspects of the music industry. It's a very kind of toxic, strange, politicky environment.
Were you doing this in New York?
Yeah, this was New York City. Yeah. So when I kind of like over the course of 3 years, sort of accidentally segued to photography, I was very happy doing that. And that happened through another community project. The project, The Best Medicine, I've decided I'm calling it, in my own words, a community documentary project, because it's documented community, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the first big project that I ever did before I was a professional photographer was called One of Many. And that was me deciding I was a little bit tired of the music industry. I was running a label at the time that I also still own. And I decided to turn it into a catalog label rather than an active label. And just to explain what that means, that just means that you're not putting new music out anymore. You just have a catalog of what you've previously recorded and put out by various bands. And so that meant I didn't need my staff anymore. So I got everybody new jobs, and we closed the office down. It was a very small company, but closed the office down, and it allowed me for the first time to really like travel the US properly, because I was just LA, New York, LA, New York, LA, New York, because I was just only working.
Only doing your business.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And after I had that freedom to travel, I decided, I want to go to these other cities that are kind of like, this sounds a little bit disrespectfully, and I don't mean it that way, but like secondary cities, as in
flyover cities.
Yeah. And also just like the perspective at the time, especially, was all creativity happens in LA or New York. Now I think people have a much more nuanced view, but that was definitely then. And so I picked 12 cities that I wanted to go to just for my own interest, because I was like, well, I can sit here, work out of a coffee shop in Brooklyn, or I can do it in Detroit and see my friend who lives there, et cetera, et cetera. So I picked these 12 cities, and I had this idea that I wanted to see what the creative communities were like there. And I started chatting with some people and photographing them, and then it got completely out of hand. And across those 12 cities, I photographed and interviewed 600 creative people. And then that was a project that I started putting out, and it got sponsored. And so in the process of that segue moment from music to photography, I realized how much energy I was getting from being able to follow my curiosity and meet these people and learn from them and see what was going on, and like what's so special about Charleston, South Carolina. Turns out lots of things. I didn't know any of these things. So that kind of like started off this accidental career of being a photographer, because that kind of went viral, if you will, in 10 years ago terms.
Right.
And here we are.
And one of the places that you picked was New Orleans.
Yeah.
Was that after Katrina, and when the city was starting to recover and people were coming back?
This would have been after, and it was in 2013 or 14. And I don't remember when Katrina happened.
10 years earlier. Yeah.
Okay,
but then it took a number of years before
it did.
For the city to rebuild, and for the people who left the city and moved to, let's say, Houston, for example, to actually start coming back and rebuilding their families and communities there.
Yeah.
I'm curious what that was like for you to see that after that hurricane, and now, when you're doing your project there, it was, 5 or 6 years later that the city had been, in full on recovery mode. What was that experience like, seeing those communities there, and how are they thriving?
Well, New Orleans is what I consider to be the most special American city. It's so unusual compared to all other cities. Because of its obvious history, and it's the makeup culturally, ethnically of that city is just so different and amazing. And there is some real soul in that city. I'm not saying anything new that people haven't said before, but it's like super special. And it was very inspiring to just feel, just walk around in that energy. Whether it's food or music or the second lines, the feeling of culture is so strong there, much more so than most any city that I've been to. So it's just very special.
Mm.
Yeah.
And the artistic community there is also very different and extremely diverse as well in terms of like just types of performing arts that go
Absolutely.
on there. What were some of the other cities on that sort of American tour?
I did, let's see if I can get them all. Seattle, Portland, Oregon, Portland, Maine, Nashville, Charleston, Savannah, Minneapolis, Madison. No, not Minneapolis. Madison, Detroit. What am I missing? Well, New Orleans. We already said that. Salt Lake City, Portland, Maine, and then one more that I can't think of it right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Detroit is often so overlooked also, and Detroit's pretty amazing.
Yeah, and
As a
also the
city,
problem
too.
with Detroit is that when it's not overlooked, it's like kind of like destruction porn,
Right.
if you will. Like
Yeah.
they show all the like, oh, look how these buildings have all been burning down.
Or look how amazing this building was, and now it's derelict. When you grew up in Limburg, in the southeast of the Netherlands, did you always kind of have this fascination with America? Because not only did you spend a lot of time there, but you did what a lot of immigrants to the States don't often do, which is visit all of these diverse collections of cities and communities that are there. A lot of times people will move to the States and will stay within New York and maybe go to Miami or Las Vegas or LA, like you said, or Chicago. Where does that sort of American fascination come from for you?
Well, I also first want to acknowledge the fact that, of course, it's also a huge privilege of mine that I got to do because of my job, got to do all that traveling. But the fascination, as a child, my two main interests culturally were comic books, always set in New York, and rap music. That's not only from New York, but that is where it started, and the part of the genre that I was most interested in. And then, of course, there's movies. It's really like the soft power of American culture through entertainment and culture.
There was over the last couple of months, there's been a big photo exhibit at the Rijksmuseum, the National Gallery in the Netherlands. That was a whole setup of American photography or American photographs in America and American photographers as well. Also some product photography and sort of not motivational posters, but kind of messaging posters and things like that. Did you go to the exhibit?
Yes, I was fortunate to go to the opening, and it was very interesting. Yeah, the curator, Matti Boom, she had been working on this for many years, and because it's also a giant collection. If I'm not mistaken, they received a very large collection as a donation at some point. I'm not sure how long ago, of a Dutch, or at least based here, collector of photography who happened to have specialized in American photography. And what's so fun about that exhibit is that it's really a history of photography that happens to be American photography. So from the very earliest daguerreotypes and like the old versions of photography all the way up to just photos that were taken a year ago. And so you can really look at it more like a history exhibit.
And, were there pieces in that collection that stood out to you most as being your favorite? For me, one of my favorites was this sort of unknown young man from Harlem who is dressed up in this, really elegant black and white suit, or at least it looks black and white, because it's not a color photograph. But and it was just amazing. And he's got his hair combed over in a certain way. And it's, I want to say from the 30s, maybe, or 40s or somewhere around there. And that was one that really stood out for me. What about you?
I really like, there's a section that was found photography, as in photography that is not like, here's a photographer who made some photos and he's an artist, but these were just kind of family photos or snaps, if you will. And I'm always a big fan of those. Just in those original tiny prints with the little, like where the edges have like a serrated side to them, and I love those always. And I also really like those there. But there was also two pieces by a friend of mine, Brian Schutmaat, which was like probably the most recent work in the show, I imagine. And one is this very beautiful portrait of just a man, not anyone specifically important, but it's just a man that he met at one point, and I find it to be a very powerful image, also.
Mhm.
Yeah.
What was it about that image, or say a little bit more about what the image looked like?
Well, Brian's work is all made for the most part made on large format cameras, and without getting too technical, there's a certain look to that. It's a black and white, very very shallow depth of field, and there's something very poetic about it. And yeah, I love black and white. I love that kind of like large format style, and they're also very large prints, which is of course also wonderful to stand in front of.
Hmm.
Yeah, so just
Yeah.
really like them.
You've been talking about these, sort of portraits sometimes taken on the street and in public. Um, what's your opinion on street photography in terms of the confrontational aspect of it? Where I think you screened a documentary or a series on
Mhm.
after one of your photo walks that also explores a little bit more, when street photographers just kind of get up in people's faces without permission, or what's kind of obviously there's a controversy to that because there's a permission aspect or an invasion or a sense of invasion of privacy or confrontation.
Yeah.
What's the value that comes out of that?
Well, I think street photography is super important as a general concept because it's history. Like it's just a snap, but in 20 years, 30 years, 50 years, it's a super interesting moment captured, right? Um, and I'm not specifically referring to the like kind of like ambush style version of the just like regular street photography. I think it's super beautiful, super important. Like um yeah, it's just really amazing. The confrontational version of it is not my style, but I'm also not going to say that there's not photos in that style that I don't really love.
Hmm.
It's just that I do a lot of street portraits also, but I don't do it that way. I always first have a conversation with someone so that they're comfortable, and I try to. Sometimes I might take a photo before I have the conversation, but if I do that, then at least they'll have seen me before. While like I'll make eye contact and then take the photo and then have a conversation. No one's ever had a problem with it. If someone were to have a problem with it, obviously I wouldn't do anything with that photo. I would just delete it. But yeah, the confrontational version of it is not for me, but I think it does have artistic merit. It is just a little bit rude at the same time.
Mm.
Yeah.
Um, what is it about those confrontation photos or the sort of surprise element of those photos that kind of, you know, I've got to say, for me personally, I see visually how some of these photos are extremely interesting and can't necessarily be captured, when going up to that person ahead of time. But at the same time, the lack of consent is, very disconcerting in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, it can be hard to get a certain emotion captured, especially in the days before cameras were everywhere when it was not expected or people didn't necessarily know exactly what was happening. Now, of course, if you walk up to someone with your iPhone, they're going to not be happy because that looks rude, which it is.
And creepy.
And creepy, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
But in those days, cameras were more rare, and so then you also get much more real photos. People like nowadays, even the youngest child, uh, that's like say my nephew. I point a camera within like a fraction of a second, he's posing because he understands what this is. Because that's how you grow up now. Everybody knows phone, camera, what that means. There's an expectation that you have to smile or pose a certain kind of way, and the history of street photography, there's this treasure trove of not that.
Mhm.
Like people just having a moment, not necessarily smiling, even if they're looking straight into the camera because they noticed it, they're still being kind of more real, if you will. And yeah, it's different these days. But like I said, I don't do that because I feel very uncomfortable. I don't like confrontation to begin with in any kind of way. So that is too confrontational for me. I've had my photo taken that way before, where I was the subject, uh, and because I'm a photographer, I was amused. But I imagine if you're just a regular person going to work or whatever, or then maybe having a bad moment, it's not fun, you know?
Hmm.
So it's difficult to weigh the historical value and the artistic value with other people's feelings, because those are also important. And it's hard for me to say like we should never do that, but I also don't want to say we should always do it. We don't care about feelings. That's like it's somewhere in the middle, and at least you have to talk to them afterwards, I think, to make sure that they're okay with that.
Yeah, it's also this weird dichotomy that I kind of feel about it as well, because at the same time, I I also look at it from the perspective of news and journalism, and the news and journalistic aspect of it almost requires that you get there to the scene of whatever is happening and you just start shooting, your camera, or you start shooting video, whatever is going on. That's the moment that you're trying to capture, and then maybe the conversation happens afterwards or even during at some point. Did we forget how to value other people, or how to value other people's privacy?
I don't know, but I do think there's a difference with journalism versus, let's say, artistic street photography. Just because, yeah, journalism, it's very important. We can't just like get to the scene of some sort of terrible thing and be like, "Hey, everybody, is it cool if I take a photo?" We need to document and capture this, because as a journalist, the person who's doing that, the news anchor, the camera person from the news, they're helping us. I mean, this sounds so lofty, but they're helping us as a species deal with stuff, know about stuff, hopefully learn about stuff. Well, I don't always feel too optimistic about that, but it's still kind of the idea of it, right?
Right.
Like we're documenting some very bad things as well as some good things, because we don't want this to happen, and we need whoever is responsible for it to be held responsible for it, if it's like, let's say, a war crime or whatever it might be. It's not a fun photo, but it is super important, and that's in no way the same with a street portrait, like a street photography thing. That is more like a historic document, maybe, but it's not as important as what journalists do, in my opinion.
What are some of the more sort of outlandish photos that you've taken? Because you've done series all over the world, and all over the US, and you've done, a large number of projects here as well. And so, what are kind of some of your more memorable or more unusual pieces of work?
I did a series on the fish market in Tokyo before they closed it down. They moved it from its historic location to some fancy new place. A lot of people were against that, and I was living in Tokyo at the time. I lived there for 3 months, and when I heard about it, I was like, "Oh, I gotta kind of get in there, try to document, And but then you're not actually allowed to go in there. Turned out, so I went. And you have to go super early, because the fishermen come in very early, and they bring in these giant tuna that are the size of like a small car. It's crazy, and they come in frozen, and they have these like kind of what to me as an uneducated person look like basically ninja swords that they cut them with, and like saws and all that kind of stuff. And so I arrived there and I tried to go in, and they were like, "Yeah, no, you can't do that. You can't get in. You're not allowed to go in here." And I was like, "Oh, okay." But it was really huge. So I just kind of like walked around to go to some other entrances. Same story. And of course, it's Japan. So they're firm, but very polite. And then I was almost about to give up. And then I saw this door just like fly open, because like someone like kicked it from the inside and was carrying like this huge like styrofoam box of fish heads or whatever that would have to be thrown away. And I was like, "Ooh," and I just like ran right into it. And I was able to be there for like 2 hours until they found me. I mean, everybody saw me there. All the people who were really working there, the salesmen, the fishermen, all the people that were cutting stuff and selling stuff, because it's like a B2B type of thing. It's like where restaurants, that famous documentary about Hiro, about the sushi, like the sushi station, he also goes there in the documentary. So it's like the most famous fish market in Japan. And so, yeah, I was able to, and after 2 hours, like someone finally from security finally spotted me and asked me to leave, which I did, of course. But I got some amazing photos out of that. It became a really nice photo essay to accompany a written piece for a website called Eater.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and I really liked that adventure, if you will, and also the photos that came out of it.
And then, wait, what are people who go to your exhibit? Because this exhibit that you have coming up in Naarden, in June and July, it's your first solo Dutch exhibit.
Right. Yes, I've only had exhibitions in the United States.
Yeah. So the people who go and see this and see your series, what are they going to see?
They're going to see the fine art side of things. So these are all images from my most recent book, Notice Journal Volume 1, which came out in November last year. And that's a series of work that I shot on kind of a special camera from the 60s called a half frame camera, which means, without getting too technical, that if you imagine like a roll of film, like 36 exposures, like if this is a negative, this would be one photo on a normal camera, but on a half frame camera, it's actually two photos next to each other, like that are separately taken. So I take a picture of you, click, and I take a picture of Marcus, click. And then on the same negative next to each other, no overlap or anything, you just see two photos.
Right.
And I use that format to tell these little stories about working through things, rebirth, like new starts, changes in life, by shooting that format across 3 spring seasons, the first 3 spring seasons that I was in Amsterdam. And spring is also like a metaphor for renewal in that work. And it's black and white. It's shot on also a special film that's not really meant for photography. It's film for cinema. So Raging Bull was shot on this film. Schindler's List was shot on this film. It's this kind of iconic old movie film that is black and white that some of the the Scorseses of the world love. And I do too, of course. So black and white, diptychs meaning 2 images next to each other. And it's more of a therapeutic series.
You've also talked about, sort of photography as an aspect of therapy, or, not quite a replacement for therapy, but
certainly not.
No. But what is it that you personally find as a photographer? What do you find to be therapeutic?
Well, for me, as a man, also let's acknowledge the fact that we are not always so good about talking about our feelings. Some men are. I mean, I know Marcus is amazing about that stuff, but
I don't know what you mean.
But sometimes we just need our time to reflect and think through and process. And for me, these solo photo walks are a great way to do that. And definitely not a replacement for therapy, but certainly for me, a nice companion format for therapy.
With the Photo Festival Naarden, where your work is going to be is being exhibited this month and next month, it's more or less it's a family rite of passage for you at this point.
It turns out it is. I had actually forgotten this because I was very, very young when this happened. But my father had an exhibition as part of the same photo festival, even in partially the same venue, 30 years before this year. And the organization of the festival also didn't know that because, of course, they're not the same people anymore as back then, but that's quite special. And so my father also is now invited for the special artists only opening before the public opening, and it's going to be a really quite lovely.
Are they doing anything special to mark the occasion? Are they showing anything of his? Or
no, there's no opportunity for that, unfortunately. But I think I'm going to produce a little catalog, not in time for the festival, but with my work from the festival and my father's work from the festival 30 years ago.
That's nice.
Yeah.
Is it sort of more personal for you doing these photo walks because you used to do them with your father when you were a kid growing up?
No, and my father is also still alive, so that's nice. It has nothing to do with that. No.
What was that like growing up with a father as a photographer, and your mother also creative as well?
Yes, my mother was still with us also, but professionally was a seamstress and a teacher. So she was amazing with making clothes for us and stuff like that. And my father was also a teacher, but then photography was on the side, even though he was very accomplished, because his generation post World War II, stability was, everything. So he was a teacher, that's the stability, and then he got to do his photography passion in addition to that. And yeah, those photo walks were great. We lived in a pretty rural area, and so it was a lot of kind of like every weekend was either going to the forest or going to some art at gallery, and it was just a way for me to be with my dad, just like have a special moment with my dad, because I think it's tricky. I also have a sister, and I think it's tricky when you have more than one child. I don't have kids, but I see it with my sister and other friends who have kids, that if you have more than one child, it's important to also have some solo time with each child.
Mm-hmm.
So in this case, I had a younger sister, but I was the one most of the time who would go with my dad to do these photo walks. And then my sister had her own solo moments with my dad and with my mom. And I think to help a child form a good bond with the parent, and also just maybe a sense of self, those solo moments I think can be really powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what that was for me.
What does your sister do professionally?
My sister's job previously was a teacher
Mm-hmm.
at an international school, and she has maybe 3 years ago, switched over to working with people who have neurological damage due to perhaps an accident or just some personal choices, and she helps them with a team of people to kind of like not only stay busy but also learn and improve certain mechanical tasks or mental tasks or
Mm-hmm.
things of that nature.
So does she have a creative side, or did she ever have a creative side to explore professionally?
Not professionally, but I think being a parent is very creative, and also coming up with ways to help these people who all have a different way of how their brain doesn't really work in the normal way.
Mm-hmm.
You gotta be creative to deal with that. Yeah.
If if your parents, or your father specifically, you said was more focused on the stability side instead of a career in the arts, which maybe was a little bit more where his heart was, what were they like towards you when you were making the decision first to do music, then to do photography?
Very supportive. And yeah, they never tried to dissuade me. I also have 2 business degrees, so maybe that helps, that it feels like, well, I guess he's doing something that's useful. But they never once expressed dissatisfaction or doubt about it. I mean, my father's father was a painter, like an art painter. It's just like kind of part of our family. Like we have, I grew up around 1 million art books, and it was just a normal part of what people do.
Mm-hmm. And do you have you've got 2 business degrees, but do you have any formal training as a photographer, or did you learn it yourself? Or
No formal training. Obviously, I watched my dad do it because he was also a photographer all that time, but no formal training.
And I mean, that's quite, well, I would say that's quite a risk to take, from, working in a sort of owning your own business, and then kind of making the leap to a totally different career with no professional credential or education credential behind it, and just trying to make a new career for yourself.
Yeah, I didn't think about it at the time. Maybe in hindsight it was, but I think for certain creative professions, you don't necessarily need a credential. Of course, you can learn so much at an art school or photography school, but there's many photographers who never went to art school or photography school. It's if you learn really learning on a job is like, that's how you learn in the end. Of course, you can learn technical stuff at school, but that's not my forte to begin with. So, yeah, I think running a music business is also pretty risky, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I've not optimized for safety very often in my career choices.
I mean, it's also it's a bit of a paradox between those decisions and you're describing yourself as an introvert. I mean, being an entrepreneur in a creative field requires a lot of extrovert behavior.
Yeah.
being a photographer who works as a freelancer and develops their own career, uh, forgive the pun using the word develops, and kind of grows their career and grows off in this direction also requires like a very sort of extroverted aspect of their personality as well.
It does, but I can choose when.
Yeah.
Right. I can choose like, okay, here we go. This is my extrovert moment. We're going to do it. And then I can go home.
Right.
And read my book.
Yeah.
Or do something else that is recharging for myself.
What is it for you? What are those recharging moments other than, just sort of sitting around reading a book? What else how do you take that space for yourself?
Alone time or time with my partner, which counts as alone time for me in terms of like recharge stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And these walks, they're very important to me to kind of like have just a moment for my brain to kind of like reset the Etch-a-Sketch, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And also improv, actually.
Yeah.
So improv, when I'm on stage or just at rehearsal doing improv, or when I'm taking photos, especially by myself, those are kind of the two only quiet moments for my head, like on the inside. And that's really nice. That's a really good recharge.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to leave it there. People can find you on Instagram. It's Wesley, because I guess must have been one of the earliest Instagram adopters to get just Wesley.
I wasn't early, but I was friendly with the original at Wesley, and he said at one point, "Hey, if I ever quit social media, you can have it." And I was like, "Sure, buddy." And then that happened.
Right.
But I already also had at Wesley on Twitter at that point, so it kind of made sense.
It worked together.
Yeah.
And then your Substack newsletter is wesley.substack.com as well.
Mm-hmm.
Where else can people find
I
you?
was early on that one. I was the very first ever photographer on Substack.
Yeah,
that helped.
In some ways, it kind of feels like perhaps social media is like a necessary evil. And, for a photographer, we've spoken with actors like a Dutch actor, Minicola. We've spoken with, other comedians and performers who like to have the opportunity to take a break from social media. But your work being so visual, being that you're a photographer, is that something that you're actually able to do yourself?
I am, but I have de-emphasized social media in my life the past number of years, which is why my newsletter, basically I started my newsletter to be able to not cut ties with social media, but make it much less important to me, because of course, like you said, it is very important, because for most people, almost everybody, in terms of visual artists, it's kind of the only way to reach new people, right? Just by having an Instagram account, or maybe for video folks, TikTok and all that kind of stuff. And I was extremely addicted to and displeased with social media a few years ago. Well, at this point already, like about 5 years ago. And I wanted to come up with another way to reach at least my people, the people who already enjoy my work, and have another way to display the work, talk about the work. Also, in part because I was frustrated with the format that, let's say, Instagram pushes you into. So simply for the sake of the form factor, you mostly will see vertical photos, portrait style photos. Because if you post a horizontal photo, let's say a landscape, it's very small on your phone screens, just because that's how phone screens are. And I didn't want to be so limited, both creatively and also in terms of reaching people. So that's why I started my newsletter and put most of my time and energy into growing that as an outlet, as opposed to social media. Mm-hmm. Because now, if you're a subscriber to my newsletter, there's a 100% chance that you will receive that email every Sunday, because that's how email works.
Right.
Whereas if you are a social media follower, I think it's like maybe 5%, because we follow so many people, all of us, and there's no way that you see all of it. And Instagram has its constantly changing algorithms that optimize for this, optimize for that, never optimizes for the stuff that I get to do in my newsletter. And and newsletter is perhaps also kind of like not really quite the proper word for it, because that implies that I'm sending you news.
Mhm.
That's not what it is. It's me talking about it's called process because I talk about the process of making the work and the philosophical elements behind it and the practical steps, so that other people can also take advantage and see what's possible, and like, oh, I can also maybe make a zine, or I can also have an exhibition, even if it's at a local cafe. It doesn't really matter, because the steps that I describe and that I explain goes for everything.
Did you, because in speaking about the form factor aspect of it also, did you ever feel like the form factor and the push towards vertical imagery was directly affecting your work when you were in the process of making it?
Absolutely. Yeah. I at some point I noticed that so when you shoot for magazines, you also oftentimes they want to have a mixture, of course, of vertical, but they need the verticals for sure, because if it's a portrait, it can fill a whole page,
Mhm.
and a horizontal photo cannot. But a horizontal photo can be a double page spread, or just nicely laid out inside of a body of text, of course. And I noticed at some point I was like, oh shoot, I forgot to take literally any horizontal photo, because I got so kind of like tapped into the the addiction that is like posting to social media and all that comes with it. So that's, just was just one of the moments that made me go like, I need to come up with something else, because this seems counterproductive.
What was it about your Substack and your approach to doing a newsletter in general that you found success with it? Because as just sort of an artist developing in their field consistently, it's not really what you immediately go towards when you think this person has a successful newsletter or that business has a successful one.
Yeah, it's hard to say, because there's not that many successful newsletters for photographers.
Mhm.
There are some, but they're all a bit different from each other, which is of course great. Um, but I think, you know, we talked about my family. I come from a long line of teachers and artists, and I think it helps in the way that you can articulate your thoughts and the process, literally the process of making something. Um, if you have an interest in that, which is how I was raised, um, in articulating and therefore basically explaining it, then that is really quite fun for a newsletter reader, for someone who is a young photographer or any kind of storyteller. Not everyone that is a subscriber is a photographer. There's many creatives that do other things, but it's fun to see how someone else is going about telling a story, or getting attention for a story, or presenting a story. And I'm lucky to be blessed with like both sides of those genetics, of like the explaining, teaching bit and the making bit.
Mhm.
Um, and then you just put a little business school sauce over it, and you have my package.
And then the other thing I wanted to know, because you were so nice to give us a preview of this latest project, which comes out later in the year.
Starts being published in September. It's called Creatives in Amsterdam.
Yeah.
Amsterdam being the first city where I do this project. It will be a weekly photo essay about a different creative person who lives in Amsterdam. So a great variety of disciplines, backgrounds, genders, all the good stuff, and just to showcase like, wow, look at all this talent we have in Amsterdam, working at a top like world level, similar to the comedian idea,
Mhm.
just to shine a light on all these amazing people. And yeah, so that'll be 52 weeks, once a week, a photo essay and a story about this person.
So where can people find you? Where
Uh,
else?
Wesley.co is my main website.
Mhm.
And from there you can find everything else. But yeah, my newsletter is it's called Process, and it's my most treasured outlet, if you will, more so than social media. It's a weekly newsletter, comes out on Sunday, where I just talk about the work I'm making and what goes into it, hoping to also encourage and educate other people who are creative people trying to tell stories, whether that's photography or some other format.
Cool. Well, Wesley Verhoeve, I mean, you're on your way to Naarden to finish setting up this exhibit at some point. So, taking, time to step away from that and sit down with us for an hour, it's super appreciated. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Really appreciate it. Damn Yankee is produced in partnership with NL Times, the top choice for English language news from the Netherlands. Founded nearly 15 years ago, NL Times grew to become the #1 site for information about this country, featuring more news stories every day of the week than any other website. Keep tabs on the latest top stories and breaking news from across the entire country, not only in Amsterdam, Rotterdam, and The Hague. Find out more at nltimes.nl. Damn Yankee is an NL Times podcast. The show was created by me and Pete Rizzo. Pete Rizzo produced this episode, and Marcus Engel edited the episode.